Welcome to True Echo, where every story strikes a chord deep within the soul. Today, we bring you an unforgettable tale of judgment, resilience, and a piano performance that silenced every doubter. Stay with us as we unfold a journey that proves brilliance often hides in the most overlooked places. Everyone at Westridge High knew who Jordan Lennox was, and no one expected much from him. He was the quiet kid, the one who always seemed to be somewhere else, staring off into the distance like he heard music no one else could. In a school driven by athletic records and GPA rankings, Jordan didn't stand out in any way that earned applause or awards. If anything, he was the punchline. The teachers pitied him, the students ignored him, and even his own father had begun to speak of him with words like lost cause and unmotivated. The truth, though, was more complicated. Jordan's world was sound. But it wasn't the sound of applause or approval, it was the sound of piano notes drifting through an old, slightly detuned upright that sat in a dusty corner of the abandoned music room. That piano, with 3 chipped keys and a cracked bench, was his sanctuary. He discovered it in his first year of high school, hiding from a group of bullies. One hand accidentally brushed the ivory, and the chord it played echoed something familiar in his chest. Something sacred. At home, things weren't much better. His father, a once respected mechanic who'd fallen on hard times, barely looked up from the television anymore. His mother had passed when Jordan was 7, and her absence lingered like smoke in every room. She'd been a pianist once, a real one. Not famous, but brilliant, at least in Jordan's memory. She had tried to teach him, but after her death, all that remained were broken recordings and a stack of tattered sheet music. Jordan never really learned to read notes. But he listened. And somehow, he remembered. No one noticed when he stayed after school. The music room had been shut down due to budget cuts, and the janitor who had the keys, Mr. Alvin, was more interested in finishing his crossword than asking questions. Jordan would quietly help him empty trash cans in exchange for a half-hour alone with the piano. And in those 30 minutes, Jordan's fingers did what his voice never could, they told stories. But stories don't win you scholarships, and certainly not respect. So when Westridge announced their annual talent showcase, no one thought of Jordan. He wasn't on the list. He hadn't auditioned. And he definitely hadn't been invited. The favorites were the same every year: Kayla Simmons, the cheer captain who sang pop songs in perfect pitch, and Diego Reyes, the saxophone-playing senior with Ivy League dreams. This was their stage. Until the night of the showcase, when everything changed. The auditorium buzzed with energy as parents, students, and faculty filled the rows. Bright lights spilled across polished floors, and stagehands whispered back and forth like choreographed ghosts. Jordan wasn't supposed to be there, at least not on stage. He had slipped into the backstage area under the guise of helping Mr. Alvin stack chairs, but what he held in his backpack was not janitorial supplies. It was a single, dog-eared sheet of handwritten notes, his own composition, something he'd been refining for over 2 years. Jordan. Kayla's voice sliced through the air like a high E note. She raised a brow as if his mere presence offended the atmosphere. "You're not performing, right?" He shook his head. "Just here to help Mr. Alvin." "Good," she said, already walking away. "No offense, but this isn't really your thing." He didn't argue. He never did. But that night, for the first time, something in him burned hot. Maybe it was the way his father had muttered, "Don't embarrass yourself," before Jordan left. Maybe it was the memory of his mother, soft hands guiding his on those keys, whispering, "Play what you feel, not what they want." Either way, Jordan knew he had to try. 5 acts into the show, Diego's sax solo earned a standing ovation. Kayla's acoustic rendition of a Taylor Swift song brought the house to a cheer. The MC, a perky sophomore with a forced smile, stepped up to announce the next act. But just then, a sound came from the side of the stage, a piano. It started soft. Delicate. Hesitant. Like a whisper against thunder. People turned their heads. There was no pianist listed next. And yet, the melody was unmistakably real, aching, haunting, beautiful. Jordan sat alone at the upright piano, fingers moving with a confidence he hadn't felt before. There was no sheet music. There never had been. Every note came from the map he carried inside him, places he had traveled alone, emotions he had buried, hopes he had never voiced. Gasps filled the room. Then silence. Then tears. What began as confusion turned into awe. Even the principal, who had once told Jordan he'd never find his place here, was visibly stunned. And Kayla? She stood frozen, her perfect smile wilted by the raw power of Jordan's performance. He played for 8 full minutes. No mic. No announcement. Just a boy and a piano. When he hit the final note, it rang through the auditorium like a bell tolling on a distant hill. For a moment, no one moved. Then, like a wave swelling from the front row to the back, the entire room rose to their feet. A standing ovation, not out of politeness, but out of shock, out of genuine awe. Jordan stood. He didn't bow. He just looked into the crowd, eyes wet, lips trembling. And walked off stage. But his story was far from over. Jordan didn't sleep that night. After his unexpected performance, the crowd's roar still echoed in his ears. It wasn't the noise that kept him awake, it was what came after. As he stepped off the stage, a flood of students, teachers, and even parents followed him backstage. Questions, praise, disbelief, it was like waking up in a dream where everything that once weighed you down suddenly lifted. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mr. Tillman, the school's retired music director, asked, visibly emotional. He had shown up to the event out of nostalgia, not expecting to witness what he called a once-in-a-generation gift. "I just play," Jordan mumbled. Kayla stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching the attention shift in real time. She wasn't used to being outshined. Diego, on the other hand, was gracious. He clapped Jordan on the back and whispered, "Man, you were fire." By Monday morning, the video of Jordan's performance had made it onto the school's Instagram page and then onto TikTok. Within hours, it spread beyond Westridge. Comments poured in from strangers. "Who is this kid? This gave me chills. How is this not a movie yet?" He went viral. But going viral doesn't mean going understood. By Wednesday, local news stations were calling the school. The principal, who had once scolded Jordan for skipping class, he had been in the piano room, now invited him to her office to discuss media appearances. The tone had changed, but the spotlight was overwhelming. Everyone wanted a piece of him, but no one knew the real story behind the song. Not even Jordan's father, who now walked around town saying, "That's my boy," with pride, as if he hadn't spent the last year calling him lazy. Yet Jordan felt uneasy. He hadn't played to impress anyone. He played because he had to. Because those notes were his memories. His grief. His truth. And not everyone celebrated him. A few students whispered that he must have stolen the piece. Others claimed he had to be autistic, or a savant, because a kid like Jordan couldn't just be gifted. The same teachers who once ignored his presence were now forcing him to attend music theory classes he never signed up for. Then came the biggest disruption yet, a letter from the Juilliard pre-college admissions committee. Jordan had never applied. He didn't even know how to. But apparently, someone sent his viral performance their way. And now, they wanted him to audition. In person. In New York City. For the first time in his life, Jordan was being invited to step into a world his mother had only dreamed of for him. But there was a catch. The audition was in 12 days, and he had no formal training, no passport to the elite language of professional musicianship. Just his instincts. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Mr. Tillman came out of retirement just to coach him, donating his time in hopes of getting Jordan ready. Local news stations raised money for his flight and hotel. Teachers who had never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to help write his resume. Jordan appreciated the support, but a storm brewed beneath the surface: fear. He couldn't read music. He couldn't replicate the same song twice with exact accuracy. And in the world of conservatories like Juilliard, talent alone wasn't enough. Precision mattered. "What if I mess up?" he asked Mr. Tillman late one evening, as they sat in the old music room, where the school had finally agreed to fix the piano. "Then mess up with conviction," Mr. Tillman said. "Play like it's the last time you'll ever touch those keys." Jordan nodded. But his heart thudded with doubt. The night before he left for New York, his father stood awkwardly at his bedroom door. "I was wrong about you," he said, eyes glassy. "Your mom she would have been proud." Jordan wanted to hug him. But the years of silence between them made that impossible. So he just said, "Thanks," and packed his bag. He was 16 years old. On a plane for the first time. Chasing a miracle. New York City was a thunderstorm of energy, noise, and ambition. Jordan stepped out of the cab near the Juilliard school and stared at the massive glass building as if it were a spaceship. It looked nothing like Westridge High. It was modern, gleaming, intimidating. Even the air felt more serious here. People walked with purpose. No one wasted steps. He clutched the thin binder Mr. Tillman had put together for him, a resume he barely understood, a list of pieces he could play, and a letter of recommendation that nearly made Jordan cry when he first read it. He wore a borrowed suit, 2 sizes too big, but it was the nicest thing he'd ever had on. And in his pocket, folded into fourths, was the photo of his mother at her old upright piano, smiling. "Go play what you feel," the note on the back read. Inside the building, young prodigies paced with headphones, muttering scales under their breath. Parents hovered like nervous satellites. A girl no older than 10 ran through a Chopin etude with terrifying precision in the lobby's practice room. Jordan couldn't read the music on her stand, but he felt it. Every frantic note was a world away from his own approach. The audition coordinator called his name, Jordan Lennox. He stood, legs shaking. Inside the audition room, 3 judges sat behind a table, unreadable faces, pens poised. "Your choice of piece?" one asked. Jordan's throat dried. "It's an original." They nodded, scribbled something, and gestured to the grand piano in the center. It was the most beautiful instrument Jordan had ever seen. Polished black. Impossibly perfect. For a moment, he was sure his fingers would freeze. What if they laughed? What if they stopped him? What if? Then he remembered his mother's voice. "Play like it's the last time." He sat. He breathed. And he began. The first few notes were hesitant, soft and unsure, but quickly, his hands took over. He played his journey, the abandoned music room, the loneliness of losing her, the hidden hours of silent practice. He played the sound of grief blossoming into beauty. It wasn't flawless. But it was real. At one point, Jordan looked up and saw something he didn't expect. One of the judges had put down her pen. She wasn't scribbling anymore. She was listening. He ended with a high chord that faded into silence like smoke drifting into air. Then the most brutal part, waiting. The judges whispered to each other. One said, "Unorthodox." Another said, "Raw, but compelling." The woman who had stopped writing leaned forward. "Jordan, do you have formal training?" He swallowed. "No." "Do you read music?" "No." "Who taught you?" He looked down. "My mom, a little. But mostly. I listened." The room was quiet. Then she smiled. "We'll be in touch." That night, Jordan wandered Times Square, numb. He didn't know if that was good or bad. The city moved around him like an endless orchestra, and for the first time, he felt like a note within it, not the melody, not yet, but not background noise either. When he landed back in South Carolina, the crowd at the airport surprised him. Students, teachers, even local reporters cheered as he walked out of the terminal. It wasn't just a personal journey anymore. It had become something bigger, a symbol of untapped potential, of underestimated youth. But the acceptance email came days later, and it changed everything. Juilliard wanted him. On scholarship. Conditional, of course. He'd have to complete a summer intensive, learn to read music, pass theory exams. But they believed in him. "You're a risk," the email read, "but one worth taking." Jordan stood in the music room at Westridge the next day, staring at the old upright that started it all. He didn't touch it. Just looked. That afternoon, he packed again, not just a bag, but his old life. He was leaving behind more than a town. He was leaving behind the silence that once defined him. And heading towards something louder than applause. Purpose. The Juilliard summer program was nothing like Jordan had expected. Gone were the comforting walls of Westridge's abandoned music room. In their place were practice studios with flawless acoustics, classrooms where students spoke in terms of dominant sevenths and polytonal inversions, and instructors who could play Rachmaninoff from memory. These weren't kids who stumbled into music, they were born into it. Many had parents who were professional musicians or had been attending conservatories since age 6. Jordan felt like an intruder. Every morning at 6 a.m., he was up with the rest, drilling finger exercises, memorizing key signatures, and struggling with sight-reading drills that left him dizzy. His tutor, a stern but kind woman named Ms. Keiko, took one look at his raw talent and said, "We'll either polish this diamond or break it trying." She didn't go easy on him. "You have emotion. Now earn the discipline," she said during one session, slapping a metronome onto his keyboard as he played wildly out of tempo. Some days, he left lessons exhausted and demoralized. Other days, he saw flashes of breakthrough, his fingers finding chords faster, his brain finally starting to translate notation into sound. But it was slow, agonizing work. And the worst part? He wasn't the best anymore. Not even close. But Jordan didn't quit. Every night after curfew, he snuck into the empty recital hall. While others slept, he practiced the way he always had, feeling the music, not dissecting it. He blended what he was learning with what he already knew. And somewhere in that middle space, his true voice began to emerge. It was during one of those late-night sessions that he was caught. The dean herself found him there, barefoot, eyes closed, playing a bittersweet variation of Debussy's Clair de Lune laced with his own improvisations. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, arms folded. He froze. Then shrugged. "Just, trying to find the music." To his shock, she didn't scold him. Instead, she walked to the stage and sat in the front row. "Play it again," she said. He did. She didn't speak until the final note faded. Then, quietly, "You don't belong in a box, Mr. Lennox. But you do need structure to amplify that fire. Don't resist it. Learn it." From that night forward, Jordan stopped fighting the system. He started embracing it, not as a cage, but as scaffolding. And the results were undeniable. Weeks later, the summer program held a final recital, an internal competition that determined which students would be invited into the full fall semester. Jordan didn't plan to win. He only wanted to play with everything he had. But when his name was called to perform, he felt the familiar tension in his spine. That voice of doubt. What if I don't belong? What if they're just humoring me? He walked onto the stage, the lights hot, the crowd silent. Then he sat. And he remembered. His mother. The dusty piano. The night Westridge stood up in applause. And he played. Not just with skill, but with soul. He fused Bach with blues, Chopin with jazz. He made the piano weep, then laugh, then rise into a crescendo so powerful the judges leaned forward in their seats. When the final note came, it didn't land like an end. It felt like a beginning. Later that night, as students gathered to hear the results, Jordan didn't expect anything. Not after what he'd heard about reputation, legacy, and pedigree. But then his name was called. Full acceptance. Juilliard, fall semester. The room erupted. Some clapped. Some didn't. A few whispered things about luck, favoritism, even flukes. But it didn't matter. He'd made it. Not because of a viral video. Not because of pity. But because he'd earned it. Fall at Juilliard was a battlefield of brilliance. Jordan arrived with new sheet music in his bag, a tailored suit that actually fit, and a growing sense of belonging, but Juilliard wasn't a place that praised yesterday's miracles. It demanded more. Always more. Every day, he was surrounded by talent that could make the world stop. Violinists who played like their bows were extensions of their souls. Vocalists who could bring an audience to tears with a single phrase. Pianists who'd already won international competitions. Still, Jordan didn't flinch. He had learned to swim in deep water. By mid-semester, his playing had transformed. He now read music fluently, understood complex theory, and could analyze compositions down to their emotional architecture. But even as he grew more technically skilled, he never lost what had made him special in the first place: emotion. That rare, vulnerable connection between heart and hand. His performances felt alive. One professor, Dr. Kessler, who was notoriously hard to impress, called him out in front of a masterclass. "Mr. Lennox," he said, "most of these students can play cleaner than you. But none of them make me feel like you do. Don't ever lose that." That recognition opened doors. A private donor offered to sponsor him. He was invited to compete in the highly selective New York Young Artists Showcase, a televised event known for launching professional careers. Jordan hesitated. He didn't want fame. He wanted to be good. But Keiko, still mentoring him, said, "Sometimes, being seen isn't about ego. It's about permission, for others like you to believe they belong." So he agreed. The weeks leading up to the competition were grueling. Media interviews. Rehearsals. Endless critiques from faculty. The piece he chose. A bold, original composition blending classical structure with gospel roots and jazz motifs, an homage to his late mother, to the South, to the pain of being invisible, and the triumph of being heard. It was risky. No one had ever performed an original piece at the showcase before. But Jordan wasn't chasing trophies. He was telling the truth. On the night of the competition, backstage was chaos, tuning, stretching, pacing. Jordan sat alone, earphones in, eyes closed, palms sweating. He didn't look the part of a star, no tuxedo, no team. Just a kid with a beat-up composition notebook and a prayer in his chest. When his name was called, the applause was polite. The crowd was filled with critics, donors, agents, people who judged with checkbooks and silence. He walked to the Steinway, nodded once to the judges, and sat. The hall dimmed. And he began. The opening notes were gentle, a lullaby. Then came the dissonance, the ache, the gospel climb. His fingers danced, surged, broke, and healed. It was not a perfect performance. But it was breathtaking. Every measure bled truth. Midway through, the camera cut to the judges. Two were motionless. One had tears in her eyes. Jordan finished with a final chord that lingered in the air like incense. Then silence. Then thunder. A standing ovation. Not just from the audience, but from his peers, too. The same elite students who once saw him as an outsider now clapped until their hands turned red. And in that moment, something inside Jordan shifted. He wasn't a fluke. He wasn't an accident. He was an artist. Jordan didn't win the competition. Not officially. The judges awarded first place to a technically flawless violinist from Vienna. It was a safe choice, a strategic one. And Jordan understood. The music world still had its rules. But something bigger happened that night, something you can't put on a trophy. The next morning, his performance video had racked up over 5 million views on YouTube. The title read, "Unknown Pianist Leaves Elite Judges Speechless with Original Composition." Clips went viral on Instagram and Twitter. The New York Times called it, "the moment that reminded the world why live music still matters." People weren't just watching him, they were feeling him. Letters poured in. From kids in small towns who had never touched a piano. From parents of children with autism, saying Jordan gave them hope. From music teachers in underfunded schools who used his story as proof that genius doesn't always need a pedigree. Jordan was invited to perform at Carnegie Hall. A record label called. So did Netflix. But Jordan stayed grounded. He signed with a modest, artist-friendly label that gave him creative freedom. He returned to Juilliard, not to gloat, but to finish what he started. He took his theory exams. He mentored incoming students. And every Friday, he taught a free class for neighborhood kids at a community center in Harlem, using an old piano that sounded like home. In every performance, every composition, he carried his mother's memory like a lighthouse through fog. He once feared the world had no place for someone like him. Now he understood. He wasn't made to fit into it. He was made to change it. From a forgotten piano in a dusty schoolroom to the stage of Carnegie Hall, Jordan Lennox's journey proves one thing: genius doesn't ask permission, it plays until it's heard. His story reminds us that the world often doubts the quiet ones, until they speak in a language too beautiful to ignore. As Jordan once said, "I don't play to impress. I play to remember." If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, real-feeling stories like this one. Comment below and tell us, what's your piano? What's the gift the world overlooked in you? And above all, share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not a failure. They're just not finished yet.